Welcome back to the DASYLab training. This training will make the most sense if you have watched the previous modules.
In this next module, we'll get into the topics of DASYLab's global strings and variables that lets us work on a bunch of different things, including using file names composed of strings and adding strings and variables to layouts. We'll also work on an example on how to use a DASYLab global variable in a module. DASYLab has 999 global strings. You can use strings for things like channel names, file names, descriptions, comments, notes, descriptive information about your test, operator names, 999 global variables. You can use anywhere a parameter can be changed at runtime. You can use the global variable save module to store a variable from a data channel, and you can use the global variable read module to retrieve the value of the global variable and use it as data, as a data channel. Variables can be used for calibration, constants, offsets, pretty much anywhere a module parameter will allow you to insert a global variable. You can configure strings and variables to be entered at program start or based on an action and an event while the measurement is running. Global variables and strings can be named, and you can do computations within the strings and variables. So for example, you could ask the operator for a duration of a test in minutes, and then in a second variable compute the duration of the test in seconds. In addition to the user-defined strings and variables, DASYLab has system strings and variables. These include information like the date and time, diagnostic information, the name of the worksheet, other information that is generally available and that DASYLab knows. One thing to note, global variables and strings are global to the program, to the worksheet that's loaded. So if you have a global variable or a global string defined, any part of the program, any part of your worksheet will have access to that information. In addition to some of the things that I mentioned, you can use strings as file names. For example, you can prompt at measurement start to use a global string as a file name. You can also, in the write data module, save the full file name to a path so that you can configure DASYLab to display the actual file name that you created. Part test operator identification, purchase orders, work orders, other context for the tests that you're running. The message module can use global strings and variables. For example, you can set up a message module to display the actual file name that was saved at the end of a test. In the recorder module and other display modules, you can add a header and configure it with a global string to display contextual information that you may want to have in the display window. In the layout windows, which is where we're going to do most of the work, you can use the text line object, the text box object, and the table object to display the global variables and strings, and you can use the table object to actually input a value at runtime, so you can dynamically change a global variable or string using the table object. And sort of the last thing on this list, as I was thinking of things, is using strings as commands for RS-232 devices. Sometimes if you're working with RS-232, it's not as easy as saying, send this value to the device under test, but it may be send a combination of command and values in one line, and you can compose those in the global string dialog. So we're going to do a hands-on. We'll start with the FFT layout example that we created in Module 5, and we'll create a string named userinfo and prompt to enter it at measurement start. We'll also display the date and time on the layout. Now note, when you name a global string or variable, There are going to be limitations on the names. For example, we're not going to allow you to name a string F. You can name it A, B, C, D, E, G, H, I, J, K, just not F.
The first thing to do is to create a string. I can do that in a couple of different ways. We have a shortcut button on button number 2 that should create a string. We can also go to the options menu, and in the layout view, the options menu has an explicit define global strings. I don't have anything defined yet. I'm going to define global string 1. I'll start by giving it a description. So this is going to be the user information. I don't have to put a value in it yet. I would like to prompt to enter a value in the startup dialog box and to require that that value not be blank. This doesn't force you to change it, but it will not allow it to be blank. When I click the Advanced button on the right, I get a place where I can enter a name. So this is going to be operator info. It's all uppercase, and the only separator that you can use is the underscore. You can't use a dash or a space character. So this is all uppercase, alphanumeric, letters and numbers, and you want to keep them usable and not too long. So I've got oper info, which is going to be user information with no value in it. I'll click OK. Now I said I want to add it to this layout, so I am going to use a text line object. So this is the same object that I used to create the title on the page. And I'm going to put the text line object underneath print layout. And again, because of the way this layout works, I'm clicking somewhere else and then clicking on text. I'll right-click on text to get to the properties. And what I want to do is put user info. So I'm typing in some fixed text. And now I want to put in some variable text. I'll right-click on it, select global string, and pick the string off the list. I'll click OK. And now I've got user info colon and then a $sign, a brace. That's the shifted square bracket on American keyboards. The name that I used, operator info or oper info. And when I click OK, you're just going to see the user info. I'll make this a little bit shorter. Now I'd also like to put the date and time here as long as we're working with this. So I want to create another text line object, and this one I'm going to put over on the left underneath the DASYLab logo. I'll do the same thing, click somewhere else and then click on it to see the extent of it. Click on the properties. And now this time I just want the date and time. I'm going to erase any text that's here. Right click, go to global string, and the bottom half of this dialog box is a list of strings that the system knows about. It has the date as the first selection. It's going to drop a placeholder that says $brace date, close the brace. I'm going to put a space dash space for punctuation. I'll right click again, go to global string, and this time I'll pick time off the list. It's the 5th one on the list. And click OK, and this drops a $brace time close brace. Click on OK, and now you're going to see that DASYLab is displaying today's date and today's time. And it is ticking. It is keeping a constantly updated value there. So this is not a good indicator whether the worksheet is running or not. That's just something to keep in mind. So how is this going to work? If I hit the Start button, DASYLab is going to prompt me for the user information. So I'm just going to put my name in here and click Start. So now I have the user info CJ Butler up on the upper right. I've got the date and time on the upper left. All right, I'm going to hit escape and stop. And as I do that, I realize that there's one more way to make this worksheet work a little bit better for you, and that would be to have a start-stop button when the worksheet is in full screen mode. To do that, I have to go back to the worksheet view. So I'll use the shortcut button to go back to the worksheet view. And I have a special mode of the switch module. So I'm going to control switch. I'll drag out the switch. And I have a mode on the switch that says start stop. This connects the switch directly to DASYLab's menus. Now, because the switch always has the channel name and the unit on it, I'm going to turn that off, go to Options, turn off with channel name and with status text. When you use a switch module with an on-off, we do recommend that you don't use any other of the channels on the switch, because as you can see, when you create the switch, it has no outputs. I'm going to change the name so that I know what it is, on-off switch. And you're going to notice I double click a lot, and that's hard to see. I'm supposed to right click and do module properties so that you can see how I open the module properties. Now this is a new module. I named it there, but I really want to also name it here. And we have a space problem, so I'm going to... So module names can be, are relatively short. So I've got a module now called on-off switch. When I restore the switch and put it up on the screen, you can see that it's got start stop. Now, when I size it, it is not resizing the letters, the font. So I need to go back into the module properties, go into fonts, and set this up to be single font automatic size. So now I have a start-stop switch that I can put on the layout. I'll go to the layout view, click on layout, and it will take me back to layout 1. And I need a start-stop switch. Oh, where's a good place to put this? For start, I need the link graph button, so that's the second button. And I'll click and draw a box for it, open the properties, and then link it to the new on-off switch. Click OK, and I have a start-stop switch that I can put somewhere. I would just rearrange all this. Let's do start-stop up here, move user info to under the layout, and put a print layout switch with the same width, more or less. So I'm just trying to make it look nice. There is a new feature in DASYLab 2020 Service Pack 1. I'm going to click on both of these objects, and I'm going to right click, and I want them to be the same width. So they are the same width. Now I want them to be the same height. Size and position, same height. So that's not really doing what I wanted it to do, is it? There we go. Okay, so now I have these things that are the same width, and they look nice sitting there. What else do I have? I have all this going on here. Now, you're going to notice when you click the button right now, it selects the object. One of the reasons I try to remember to do this when I'm teaching is to be able to tell you about a feature in the Layout Options menu under Global Layout Settings. When you are initially creating your worksheet and your layouts, we have configured the layout to use the mouse to create the layout and to operate the instruments. So what this is trying to say is while you're in the windowed mode, you're editing the layout. When you're in the full screen mode, you're operating the instruments. You can set this up once you are done to say you only want to operate the instruments in the layout. You don't want the ability to edit. This is going to be a computer by computer thing, not a worksheet by worksheet thing. So now when I click on the Start button, it's going to prompt me for the Startup dialog box, and I can click Start. Well, that worked. Now I've got a Stop button. I can click Stop. I will do something to change my data. Let's change the frequency. Now I'll click Start again. It prompts me again. And I've got different data coming in, so the DASYLab worksheet is running now. The only way to tell that this is running is to see the data change and to see that the Start-Stop button, the Start is in green. If the worksheet is stopped, the color will be on the Stop side of it. It will be in red. So to get out of this, you would do Control F. Now, I recall saying that you could also use a table object to be able to create a variable field on the layout that you can change information. The table object is the grid button on the function bar that if you click on the table button and click and draw a table, it's not letting me because I can't edit. I've got to go back to the global layout settings and go back to let's be able to edit. So now I've got an object. I'm going to click and draw a 2x2 grid. I'll open its properties. Now I have 2 columns, 2 rows, and then I have navigation to tell me what cell content is. So I really only have one piece of information right now, which is going to be the operator information. I would like this to be editable as a variable. Now we're using variable here in the context that it can be a global variable or string. It just means changeable here. We have the text alignment capability. We have the ability to create a frame and a background color, and we do display the grid. You can change the font. You can auto scale it if you want to do that. So the operator information is in column 0, row 0. Now I'm going to move to column 1, row 0, and I'm going to, oh, I did that backwards, didn't I? All right, go back to 0. 0 is no editable. Column 1 is going to be the variable 1 because I'm going to right click here, go to global string, and I'm going to select global string 1. So you know, even when you've been working with a product like DASYLab for a long time, you can do things backwards, so don't mind me. The main thing is that if I click plus again, column 0, row 0, let's do that right. Column 0, row 0 is a label. And then column 1, row 0 is a variable piece of information that will be the contents of operator info. I've got auto scaling the font and line height. And so now I'm going to adjust this to get it to auto scale to be readable. All right, there we go. And if you want to make the width wider, for example, on column 1, you can make the width wider. I'm going to make this 75 DASYLab units. Okay. So now I'll extend the box to match. How's this going to work? So I've just got a box down here. I also am displaying the same information. I'll click the Start button. So I got to do it on the function bar. I can put in random information, click Start, and now I'm here and I'd like to get that fixed. I'll double click on the box. You can see it's highlighted. I'll erase what's there and I will put Butler Training and hit Enter. Now you're going to see that this has changed to Butler Training and this has changed to Butler Training as well. So the next thing to argue with anything like this is sizing. Let's get it to fit so that it looks nice. I'll stop the measurement. I'll hit Escape. I said auto scaling font and line height. Let's make this bigger and shorter to be able to get it to fit. There we go. So you can give up on the auto scaling and simply go with a font that you want to use. Let's make it a 20 font and set default width. So now this is going to fit and size it so that you can see it's 2 boxes. So you can control the width of each column. So column 0, let's make that 60 and click OK. And now Butler Training is wider than the operator information. Now if I make this taller, this hasn't resized along with it. I'm going to go and make the font bigger and see how that looks. So that needs adjustments. Let's go to default width again. And it's fixed itself to be able to display both pieces of information. So this can be anywhere on the screen that you want it. It's an entry field. If you need to give your user explanation, then you can put a text line above it, or you could even put a text block above it to give yourself room to explain information that you want the user to be able to see. So we're going to go into properties here. The font was too small. Information can be entered directly into this table. Click OK. And so now you've got a box that gives you a quick description, and it will automatically wrap and be visible on the screen. So you can provide some hint and clues. You're going to note that we've made some changes to this. We've got the date and time, we've got the user info, and then we've got this table. For the printable version of it, I'm going to do a click and then a control click and copy and go to my report and paste this on my report. I have the same problem that I had yesterday, that I need to be able to resize to get this in here. So now I've got the date and then I've got the user info that I will put immediately below the date. So now I have a report that's got slightly more context in it. You can configure the report any way you want. You don't, for example, have to have the frame. I do recommend if you're printing that you keep the background plain. We will not print the background color of the layout page. So if I were to make this background color be a gray again, and then when I click Start now, I get my prompt. If I click Print Layout, it's going to print in my editor. So I have my editor, and you can see that it doesn't print the background color, but the background color is behind the digital meter. So you do want to be careful of that. So that's a quick look at using global strings. We've used both a system global string and a user entered global string. I can show you another example of how some of this works, and give you an idea of some of the other things that you can do with layouts. So let me hit stop measurement, escape out of this. I'm going to save this worksheet. And then I am going to open an example folder that I have to be able to show you how to use layouts with some controls and with global strings.
Now I want to talk a little bit about variables, and the best way to do it is to use an example. I'm going to use the FFT example that we've got with the layout. I'm going to create a variable called filter frequency, or freq. We will enter it at measurement start. I will need to change the worksheet to insert a digital filter module between the input and the data window, configure it for low pass, and configure the filter frequency to use a variable. And then when we run, we can enter a valid filter frequency and look and see how it works.
In the worksheet view, go to the Options menu. Global Variables and Strings has a submenu in this view, and we'll define a global variable. Global variable 1 is a good place to start. We can give it a description. I can enter in a valid value, so I'm going to do a low pass filter. Let's make this 60 Hertz. You've got the ability to set the number of total digits and then the subset, the number of decimal digits. And we want to configure this to enter the value in a startup dialog box. You also click the Advanced button on the right in order to name this. So this is going to be filter_freq. Click OK. Now I have a defined global variable that will prompt at measurement start, and it has an initial value of 60. So I've got to create a filter module to actually use this. In the signal analysis module group, digital filter is the first one to choose from. Drag it out. It, by default, does not display a warning for an invalid frequency. If the frequency is invalid, it simply won't apply it. So I want to do a low-pass filter with a filter frequency that's going to use a global variable. I'll delete the value that's there, right-click, select the global variable from the list, click OK. So now it's put in the filter frequency, and I'll leave everything else the default. Click OK. Now I've got to put this in line. What I'm going to do is delete the outputs of the analog input, move it to the left, and then connect the digital filter in line before the data window module. And then I'll connect the filtered data to the YT chart 00. So now I've got the analog input, a digital filter, a data window, and then the frequency computation. Now I can go to the layout window for the displays, and I already have a table where I'm entering the operator information. I can also use that same table to enter the global variable dynamically at runtime. So in column 0, row 1, I want to put a label for the filter frequency. And then in column 1, row 1, I want to put the variable information. This is a variable this time, not a string. And I'll select the filter frequency to be variable. Click OK. So now you see that the filter frequency has got that number in that I put in. It's 60. Let's try it. Hit start. It prompts me for 60. I will put a low pass filter of 100 and click start. The layout goes to full screen. You can see that I have got the filter frequency at 100. If I increase the frequency of my incoming signal, the filter is going to start damping out the amplitude associated with the higher frequencies. If I reduce my signal, you can see that I've got 5 volt or so signal coming in. I can increase the amplitude on that a little. Now if I change the filter frequency to 60, you'll see that without doing anything else, it has removed some of the energy associated with the signal, which is at currently 72 hertz. If I then reduce the frequency again of the original signal, you can see the original amplitude starts to come back again. So if I change the filter frequency from 60 to 200, then you're going to see that I'm not doing much filtering at all because my signal is a relatively low frequency signal. If I change my filter frequency to 1, then I have pretty much damped out my signal. So the filter module has removed all the dynamic component of the signal, and this is one way for you to dynamically change your worksheet under your own control without having to go back into the worksheet view. So I will put the filter frequency at 0, which should create invalid. And so now it is filtering normally, which is to say it's not filtering at all. So that was a quick example on how to use a global variable. We used it in 2 places. Let me stop the measurement, hit escape. I can go back to the worksheet view. The first place I'd used it was actually in the digital filter module. So I replaced the filter frequency with a placeholder, the dollar brace filter free close brace. I had defined the global variable in global variables and strings under defined global variables. There is a shortcut button. The green button number 1 is the shortcut to the define global variables dialog. And then on the layout, on the displays layout, I added the filter frequency as an editable value in the table object so that you can not just see the value of it, but change it dynamically at runtime.
Now let's take this information that we've learned and apply some of it to the Write Data module. I want to use combination file names where you can create a unique file name that combines the date, the time, user enter information. For example, you can configure the file name to include the year, month, day, user entered information such as a work order number, some fixed information such as the word data, and then DASYLab entered information with the multi-file number. So that now you have a unique file name that for every test that you run will get updated to reflect the information that you've entered as well as the date. So we're going to recreate the data logger worksheet, and then we'll configure the file name where we use combi as the file name type. We'll right-click to enter the data folder from DASYLab, and then we'll use year, month, day with punctuation. I'll define a string for the work order number. I'll add it to the file name, and then I'll include the fixed name for the file. I've typically used data, and then I'll enable multi-file.
So I'll recreate a data logger worksheet. I use the USB 201 from Measurement Computing. I'll configure 3 channels, so double-click. I had a scaling module. Under Mathematics, Scaling, I want to do linear scaling unit conversion. 1, 2, 3 channels. Channel 0, I am going to multiply by 2 and add an offset of -1. On channel 1, I want to add an offset of -1.75. And I'll do the same thing on channel 3. So as you can tell, this is just kind of random doing scaling. When I don't have a real sensor here, it honestly doesn't matter what these values are. I can change my unit from volt to, let's call it newtons today. Remember, if it isn't in this short list, you can type anything in that you want. So we could just as easily call this PSI. All right, so I've got an analog input, a scaling module. I want to visualize my data. I'll go to the display group and create a digital meter. 3 channels, 1, 2, 3. I need an output on this. Open its properties again. Copy inputs. Now add a chart recorder. 3 inputs. Copy inputs. Connect it. And then I have a write data module, which is the whole reason that we're here. So first thing I want to do is test it. I'll restore my displays, arrange them so that I can see them. Hit the start button and verify that I am seeing data. I should really decrease the frequency of the signal down to something that's going to be viewable and decrease the amplitude of the signal. All right, so I have got 2 data values that are coming in that aren't connected to anything. And then I have my signal generator that's giving me a sinusoidal waveform between -2 and 3 and +3. So I have a signal, I have data, I can look at that, I will stop. Now I will add the write data module and connect it up. So I have 3 inputs. I'll connect it. And now we need to configure it. So previously we had used CSV as a file type. So I will select CSV. I will click yes when it tells me that it's going to configure the way it writes the data. I'll look at the options menu, and in the options menu it tells me it's comma separated, it's windows, it's storing the time format as measurement time. I will change that to date and time. It's going to use the decimal format from Windows, and it will pick the time up from the data. So this is all good. I need to turn on multi-file. I'm going to enable it. I'm going to append to the file chain to force DASYLab to look in the folder and pick up the next file number. I'm going to change the number of blocks from 10 to 0 to tell DASYLab to only create a new file when you start the measurement. I'm going to use 3 digits, and I want my first number to be 1, just because today. Click OK. So now I have, as you can see at the bottom, a file that looks like a folder path and then def-write, the default name, and CSV. In order to set this up to work the way I want it, I want to create a combination file name, which opens up a new panel where I can type in the information. I'll start by erasing everything that's there. And the first thing I want to do is pick up a path. I'll right-click, go to Global String, and in the bottom half of the Select Global String dialog, I have the folders that have been defined as the default folders. I'll store the data in the data default folder. Click OK. This puts a placeholder in here that will have the location where DASYLab thinks the data is. I'll click in the gray area to have DASYLab show me what that is. So it's going to go to the same place, See Users, Public Documents, DASYLab, with Service Pack 1, 15.1.0, ENG for English, and then Data. And data is the folder, so I really want a slash at the end of folder. So I'll put a backslash after the brace and before the dot. Now I said I wanted this to use year, month, day, and a work order number. So I'll start by right-clicking again, going to global string, and when I look at the list in the bottom, I have the date. In the US, the date is typically something like 12/17/20. Windows does not allow the slash in a file name. And I've discovered over the years I really like using year, month, day to help organize my files in a folder. So I'll select year first and click OK. So now I've just got the number of the year, which is still 2020, a fine year. Now I will go back to the line and I'll put a dash in, which is allowed by Windows. I'll right click again. And this time I've got to scroll up. I want the month with a leading 0. That lets Windows alphabetize better. So I'll select month with a leading 0. I'll put another dash in. By the way, there's nothing stopping you from typing this in, except that we are all error-prone to typos, and letting DASYLab type it in makes it a little bit easier. Day_LZ gives me the day with a leading 0. So now if I preview what that's going to look like, it's going to be 2020-12-17, and then the underscore associated with the multi-file. So now I position back up before the period again, and I would like to put in a work order. So I'm going to type in an underscore, and now we're going to show you coming at global strings backwards. Global strings always exist. If I right-click here and go to global string, these 999 strings exist even though I haven't defined them. So I could just select global string 1 here and then go back and define it, or I can define it now. There's an Enter button at the bottom right of this dialog box. If I click Enter and select global string 1, first thing I'm going to do is give it a name. I'm going to call this a work order. I'll click OK. I'll give it a description. So this is a work order. I will put some context in here, so I'll just do WO12345. And I will ask my user to enter it in startup dialog box. I really do want this to not be blank, so I'll select input as necessary. Because we are doing a combination file name, we don't need to select file selection or directory selection here. So now I've defined it, click OK. I've got a work order selected now because that was the first one. Click OK, and DASYLab drops the placeholder for work order. And now I'm just going to enter the word data after an underscore just to give this a solid name. So now when I click in the gray box underneath, I've got the folder, I've got the year, month, day, I've got an underscore, a work order number, underscore a fixed word, data, and then underscore a variable number of numbers, or a variable number that will be the multi-file number. I'd like to see what this looks like when we're done. So I'm going to create a string. I can't use work order here because otherwise you get into this awful recursive thing. And I am going to use the global string dialog again, and I'll create a second string. So this is the number 2 is going to be the actual file name. And I don't need to do anything else here unless I want to name it. So this is the actual file name. Click OK. I'll click OK, and now I'll select it from the list. Okay, so now we're going to put it in to the global string called actual file name. And I'll do it with the path because the path could change from computer to computer or version to version. Click OK. Next thing for me to do is to open up a folder so that I can see where this data is going. So I'm in the wrong folder there. Let's find the DASYLab 15 folder, data. All right, so we're in the data folder. And right now I only have an example that I had created and the default files that are there. I'll save this worksheet, file save as. This is data logger with custom file name. And I'll click start. So I get to enter in the work order number. So this can be XY6789. And I'll click start. And I am reading data. I'm seeing it on the screen. And if I look at that file folder, I have created the file with the year, month, day in the name, XY6789 as the variable information that I typed in, the fixed, and then it's starting at number 1. I can add that context to this screen without creating a layout. So if I click on display and say show header, in DASYLab 2020, I can double click on the header. It opens up a header text dialog where I can right click, select global string, and I can pick the actual file name, put the placeholder for that there, and then DASYLab will put that entire file name in the header, which is one way to see some information without having to create a layout to also display it. I could also have done the header setup in setup header, where you can change the font, the color, as well as the information that you're displaying in the header. So I'll save this again and click start. Note that this is data 001 and it was XY6789. Let's change this to TG34. So now I've got a completely new file name. It's also starting at multifile 1 because it's a whole new file name. So year, month, day, the work order number, and then the word data. If we look at the folder, there's the file. So we have been able to create a custom file name and use that to ensure that you always are creating a new file name that reflects information that's important to you in your file name. I do recommend that if you use the year, month, day, you do use some punctuation so it's clear, and that you use underscores or spaces or other formatting in the file name just to make it clear and make it sortable. Now, if you really love this and you hate having to remember how to do it, we've got a way for you to set up a file and then be able to use your default setup every time you create a new write data module. Right-click on the write module and go to Module Default Settings and click Set. This will save the complete current context of the write data module as your default file or default settings. So now if I drag out the write data module again, it's 3 channels and it has all those same settings that we just set up. If I really didn't want to do that, I really wanted a new file, so I'm going to right click and delete it. If I hold down the Control key and drag out the module, it will bring out DASYLab's defaults. So now you have a choice, your defaults or DASYLab's defaults. And if you don't like that at all, you go back to module default settings and you clear it out. So you can clear that module class, or you can set it. It remembers its context. These files, or this information, is stored in a file. I'm looking in the DASYLab folder under Other. In the Other folder, there is a folder called moddef, where the default module definition is stored. So if you set it up and you want to move it to another computer, you can move this file to this folder location on another computer.
This module has covered a lot. We looked at global strings and variables. We displayed and updated strings and variables on a layout. We entered strings and variables at measurement start. We named the strings and variables, and we used a variable as a module parameter. We used a mix of system and user strings to create custom file names. So it's a light introduction to a fairly complex topic, and hopefully we'll let you start experimenting with strings and variables and seeing some of the ways that it can make your worksheet more automated. Module 7 will be split into 2 parts to be able to keep each video under or about an hour. Part 1 will talk about documenting DASYLab, averaging data, and separating data. Part 2 will talk about multiplexing data, the new SmartMux feature, and the signal router and signal switch modules.